Hello, folks, and welcome to another edition of Fired Up. My name's Morgan McLintic, and today I'm joined by Chris Ulbrich.
Hey there.
And Ian Lipner.
Hey, Morgan. Hey, Chris.
We are going to be talking about the lost art of B2B product PR. So, quick story. Back in the mid-2000s, I was working with a company called WatchGuard, and this is a cybersecurity company. They make a firewall. It's a hardware box, and they compete head-to-head with another company called SonicWall. And the foundation of their PR program was product reviews. They sold to SMBs and to enterprises, companies still around, but the product reviews were critical to the extent that we as the PR team would write guides about how to review this product. We'd provide data. There would be a call with the reporter and the systems engineer to sort of set up and make sure that the reporter had everything that they need, that the product was working. The product would be tested before it was ever sent to the reporter. It was a whole major process because every review was critical and would be then used by their sales team, but would also be read by buyers to inform themselves on which product to buy. And if you had a great 5-star review, that equaled success for the PR program. And publications like Network World, PC Week, InfoWorld, eWeek would have labs that were set up to review these products, and you'd get a lot of them. So all the work went on sending out, ensuring, and recovering these products. But today, the world has changed massively. These publications don't have those labs, and you don't see that kind of product PR at all. So today we're going to sort of dive into that a little bit. Chris, why don't you sort of kick us off with a bit about what is the state of product PR today? We're talking about B2B products, not consumer products. I just want to be clear on that before we dive in.
Right. That's an important distinction because insofar as the media does cover technology, it really does tend to be on the B2C side now. As you said, 10 years ago, the world of B2B product PR looked a lot different. I can remember doing announcements where you would have like a .0 update to an accounting package, let's say, and you had technical trades, you had accounting trades, you had just general Silicon Valley publications that would pick this up. So as we know, I mean, it's the old story that the number of places to put any kind of tech-oriented story has declined. That's especially true of product PR. So right now, there are relatively few publications that you can depend on to cover a product announcement, speaking broadly. One of the most obvious examples, the one that still does, is SiliconANGLE. That's still going strong and still a good candidate for a wide variety of tech verticals. And depending on the niche of your software or your offering, there are trade ecosystems like, say, fintech or travel, where you do still see reporters who will pick up a product just as news. But by and large, what you're seeing is a shift from treating product news as a story in itself to a model where product news is more a reason to cover your sector or as a reason to cover your company. But rarely are you going to see a story that sort of recapitulates and expands on your product press release.
I would agree with that. In general, we're seeing this shift from focus on the product to focus on the brand among our clients. With journalists in general, they're not set up anymore to write those kinds of stories. That's not what their editors want them to be doing. And there are other places for people to go to kind of get the like feeds and speeds, so to speak, that we used to talk about when it came to tech. And obviously there's more things that have shifted beyond how media talk about tech and product updates.
It's not just that publications no longer have the labs and the sophistication, the resources to bench test a firewall, but it's also that the nature of the products themselves has changed, right? Being cloud-based or being open source. I think it's worth exploring that because it's not just about changes in the media. It's changes in the product too that have changed product PR.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I mean, I should go back to the example of the accounting package. I think there are a few salient points to make there. One is that product PR in the past tended to focus on experiences that were relatively easy for a reviewer to get their mind around or to experience for themselves. And here we're talking about reviews, right? But also if someone is covering the news, if you're talking about the addition of a discrete feature or a UI element that the reporter can see and experience, they can sort of understand why this elevates the product beyond the previous and why it might represent a competitive advantage. So much enterprise product these days is enterprise scale, which means that it's designed to facilitate processes that are large and mostly invisible. You're increasing the efficiency of processes by an important amount, but an amount that's hard to experience directly if you're an individual reviewer or reporter working from home. And it is difficult to appreciate unless you are experiencing it in the context of a large organization. Like you imagine a big workflow product, right? That's like a quote to cash product that is facilitating a really complicated multi-party process. Even the best software like that is going to be hard for a reviewer or a reporter to really capture in 800 words, especially if they're not writing for a dedicated audience. So that sort of gets back to why the healthiest verticals for B2B product PR are ones that do still have a healthy specialized trade ecosystem. Because if you have 800 or 900 words to write about, let's just say again, quote to cash, you can't spend much time introducing the whole concept. You need to use the shorthand your audience understands already. And then I just want to say one more thing about the nature of the software. I think the shift to the cloud and to product-led growth really shifted also where people got their information about products and the need for the media to deliver product updates. As companies became more sophisticated about getting the word out about their new product themselves through blogs and social media, that reduced the demand, I think, for coverage that mainly just recapitulated an announcement, because businesses could just do that themselves and that news became regarded as more commoditized. The other side of it is that I think with product-led growth, where you have enterprise users able to spin up a cloud offering for themselves as a trial on a trial basis, working directly with the company, maybe just working with their website, it sort of reduced the need for that intermediate step where some kind of expert on high in the media tells you what technologies you ought to be considering or putting on your short list. You can just go straight to the source. And I know, Ian, you were also talking about the role when we were batting ideas around for this podcast. You were talking about the role of enterprise review sites.
Yeah, I mean, before I get into that, I just kind of want to take a step back and just talk about kind of like how software has become less newsy as a result of switching to SaaS. It's constantly iterating, and users expect the features to just evolve without any fanfare, right? That product has it, when is the competitive product that I have can have it, kind of thing. And like you said, it's experiential. Now it's in there. I'll test it. But those like frequent minor changes are harder to position as noteworthy, even though product teams are like, oh, we just made this incredible thing possible. Folks are just so used to things just popping up. It's like we've become a nerd to the news of things. And that's why I think it is a big deal when iOS does a .0 update. You know, we still do have those moments.
That's a really good point. To use the consumer analogy, I mean, I'm sure we've all been around long enough. We can remember people literally camping out the night before to get the next version of Windows OS. So updates to software, because they were less frequent, they were more of an event for the end user. That's true on the enterprise side as well as on the consumer side. They're more of an event for the end user, and that also created demand for product coverage.
you'd have to install this thing, right? You'd have to go out and buy it and install it. It didn't just roll out to everyone in an incremental way. I mean, you still see SaaS companies bundle up a bunch of different features and sort of try and have a bit of a moment around a big upgrade or new feature set, going after a new vertical or whatever. I mean, that still has a role to play. But in general, the incremental feature rollout on every couple of weeks that they have, because they're in a DevOps motion or whatever, you don't have a dot release.
That's right. And even when you do, the dot release does not necessarily have a coherent theme to it. So getting back to strategy, what do you do to effectively execute a PR campaign when you have these challenges in front of you? One of the things that we will typically recommend is when our clients have an update coming up that is effectively a ragbag of features, or could be seen that way if you didn't carefully edit your message about them. Well, we say pick the most thematically important aspect of this feature that's in this update and build your message around that. Instead of presenting it as a collection of features that have equal weight, and obviously we advise on this, but look at what is the most salient feature in there and make the announcement. This is your LLM connectivity announcement, or this is your vector search rollout if you're a SQL database, right? And all the thought leadership you do around this announcement then connects to that one core aspect of the feature set. Doesn't mean you can't mention the other features in your press release or in your communications with the media, but it's increasingly important when you're putting product news out to think about what sort of theme in the news the product represents, because that's more likely going to be the media opportunity. The reporter is not so much likely to look at your announcement and think, my readers need to know that such and such a company has a new update out and that it has these features. That's commoditized. That's on your website. Where the reporter can add context is where the most important and newsworthy feature or features in your announcement, what that reflects about the state of the industry and opportunities for their readers.
We've heard it before. The media are curious about the problems that people are trying to solve necessarily than what tool they use to solve it, right? And bringing that theme and connecting it with, okay, this is a problem that impacts as wide of a portion of their audience as possible, is how you have to bring that product news in, right? Like, it's not going to just on its own be like, hey, guess what? I've got a better new mousetrap. The story has to be about rodent populations are increasing in Gen Z homes, right? Like, it has to, I'm sure they're not, guys. I'm sure they're not. But, it has to have some problem that seems to be new or seems to be newly addressable. Whether you guys are just laughing at the Gen Z.
Why did you pick that out of all the possible examples?
Mousetrap.
Mousetrap, and
okay,
generational stories. Or
it's a good one. It's good. Go with it, Ian. We're still with you.
Gen Z are better at catching mice than any generation prior, according to our new research, thanks to modernized mousetraps. But yeah, I think it's about, okay, like, prove to me that this is a problem first, right? Prove to me that this is a thing is a big part of the pitch, because of what you were saying before about that. They don't have the words in their 900 words to like present the whole problem. And they're not necessarily in a vertical publication that everybody already knows what the problem is, right? So your best opportunities are actually to bring to the journalist a better understanding of some difficulty that is happening and that is driving people toward action. And yeah, maybe you'll also get a chance to talk about your particular solution. And those product launches were useful because they could trigger internal reviews for people. Oh, well, okay, there's a new thing now that there's, a new, PR database, to use a B2B product we use, like, maybe we should start thinking about these things, right? And now that there aren't so many of those, folks they're still looking for some sort of external validation, right? That's why they do go to these sites like G2 and Capterra and Trust Radius, and PC Magazine even still does a couple things. But the approach from a PR side is not the same. Some of those sites are looking for an investment as well from our clients, but they're largely driven by users. So our clients are spending a lot of time incentivizing users to go ahead and present their experiences in those environments and not trying to cheat at it, just going, hey, you're a happy customer. Please tell your story for us, right? And that's something that speaks to how buying is changing, about how people want to quickly find that information. They don't necessarily want to read a long story if they already know they're shopping for it. They want to see that their peers are using those products and are happy with those products. But they also know that, they're savvy, right? They know that their companies are being asked to review them. So they're not relying only on that. And the decision doesn't just come down to some pay-to-play site or some social-driven site. It comes down to the surround sound that you create around, okay, does this company really understand that problem that I'm solving? Does this company understand companies like mine? Does this company seem to respond quickly when there are new innovations or there are problems with products, or those kinds of things do very much fall within what we can do in our jobs in creating messages and content that resonates with them. We have seen for several clients where we are able to describe a problem with empathy, with authenticity and specificity in a way that makes a trade reporter go, you know what? Yeah, I'd like to hear more about this topic that you're discussing. Maybe it's about a problem with integration in an industry, or maybe it's about a problem with finding talent. Those kinds of things that are supplemental to the jobs and the roles that those people making that buying decision are in. So that's where I think third-party validation doesn't have to be about that specific release or feature. It starts to be more about how does this brand address product and how do they go about innovating and identifying the problems that need to be solved in our niche.
So to recap, B2B product PR has changed because the changes in the media that we've all been seeing over the past few decades, they're less equipped. They have fewer resources for that. Number two, the products themselves have changed. They've gone into the cloud and they are maybe they're SaaS. And so they have fewer moments that could contribute to a product story, or maybe they're open source and the products are out in the wild anyway in the open source version before they go into the enterprise version. It's not new to a lot of your community. And buyers have changed because they can either get the product directly through a PLG motion, so they don't need to read a review. I can trust my own experience. Or they can go to dedicated peer review sites like G2 Crowd to kind of get this fundamental information, or just straight to the website of the company where they can kind of get the fundamental information. So the opportunity for these large sort of set piece product PR has gone. It can be filled a little bit by brand, talking about the issues as Ian just talked. But Chris, where do you see now the role of product PR in most sort of PR programs?
It remains important, but for different reasons. It is important, perhaps even essential, as a way to maintain your visibility with your target media and to also message to your own users and to prospective users that you're continuing to innovate. And traditional media might not even be the primary channel. You get the word out that way. It might be largely through own channels that you're communicating with your users and with prospects that you're in process with. Beyond that, though, you need to be having these touches with the media, because even though you do not see as many stories about products per se, you will often see when even top tier media like the Wall Street Journal, when it covers enterprise news, often the vendor that is most prominently featured in that article in an analysis of a new sector, like say vector databases or something like that, it will hinge on a product announcement. The product announcement itself doesn't get much play. It's what's known in the business as a news hook. So it's sort of an excuse to cover this story at this moment. It's the hook the reporter needs to make the story publishable in a news-oriented publication, but it's not the focus of the story. I often compare it to when celebrities are doing a tour for a new movie or authors are doing a tour for a new book. And a lot of the time when they're interviewed, most of the back and forth is not about the new thing. It's about any number of other sort of aspects of a celebrity or a funny story they heard. They're just a great guest, or they're a guest that is sort of considered newsworthy aside from the value of what they bring based on their latest project. They do get a chance to plug their latest project. And that's what you're going for with B2B tech PR now, with product PR. You're not really expecting to get a recapitulation and an expansion on your press release. You're looking to get an opportunity to talk about the bigger themes and trends in the market that are important to you and your audience.
Yes. So still have a good cadence of product news when you can. Try to pull out a theme, as Chris had said earlier. Often you can have a sort of mix of different features, but try and have some kind of red thread through that so that people can understand it and it doesn't look like, well, we've just done all these different things. And some of them are for management and some of them are net new features. Try and have something consistent there. But it gives you some chance to talk to reporters. Ian, should we be announcing these product news at company events, maybe our user conference, or at shows, KubeCon, for example? Is there any advantage in doing that? Or does that make it harder in some ways? Because if you're at a large event, you're competing with everybody else.
Yeah, I think we're seeing more companies do it at their own events, their own user events, where they can control the entire attention of the audience. The bigger companies, obviously, that have the capability of putting these events on, depending on whether the product is going to be seen as a major launch. Sometimes, look, as this podcast airs, a bunch of companies are going to try launching products at Microsoft Ignite, for example, somebody else's event. So when you have the right basket of people that are going to be the folks that you want to have, maybe even live demos, create that tangible connection to the product, right? Where they had an experience. When you have that right group of folks, yeah, there's an opportunity there. But you can experience that from the PR side, there's just a crush of announcements and it's very difficult to stand out. I think you have to kind of measure in those cases like, all right, if this is an event where, okay, we only have a portion of our ideal customer profiles here, maybe it's not worth it to tie the whole announcement to this. Whereas, hey, if this is all the folks that we want in one place, if this is a major HR event where we can turn a bunch of heads with a multi-channel campaign and establish some of these things, this surround sound that we've been talking about, like the why of the product, the problems, the examples of folks who have solved that problem. If you're at an event, you can have your users speaking there or your users in your booth. Like it becomes something useful. But, the more parts, the more things that you've got to manage, right? And to summarize, I like the idea of doing it when you have your own user show or your user group, because you control that event. And it also gives a nice big crescendo point, right? It gives you an apex for that event for the people in person who are feeling like they get to see something before everybody else. You got to be more careful about choosing your spots, I think, at the bigger shows these days. There's just not enough people to come by your booth and look at the product.
Right. And I think along those lines, it's also worth noting, and again, this is a rule of thumb, but it's worth noting that compared with 10, 15 years ago, the editorial ecosystem, the ecosystem of people who are quote unquote covering news coming out of events has shifted much more toward the pay to play side. So you're working more with publications that are sometimes openly saying, like, we'll be doing a podcast from this event and this is how much it costs to be featured on our podcast. Or you are talking about analysts who have always been one of the big presences at tech shows, increasingly they're the only presences at tech shows, except for the really big ones. And those are individuals who, while they may not be charging up front, they're looking to have some kind of financially remunerative relationship with you as a vendor, so that you might have some sort of relationship building meeting with them. They might take an interview with you, might even write it up. And again, that's always been true, but now it's just that the percentage of opportunities at shows is greater, that I would say the majority, as opposed to just like one among many.
I definitely did not mean to skip over the idea that like there was a time where we would fill folders with your product information and drop them off in a media room.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that was a good way to make sure 10, 12 journalists saw it. Those media rooms are mostly analyst rooms now, or coat rooms. And a lot of the communication is all electronic anyway, right? And there's not that many journalists attending. So the event can still be a great way to do a multi-channel campaign and be a good launch point for that. But yeah, it's not going to be where you're going to find your journalists in droves.
Well, right. And actually, you bring up a good point there about the media room, because what we have seen recently as a sort of substitute for that is like the sponsored press day, where you pay a certain amount to get to participate in the show's like organized day of briefings or a couple hours of briefings, where they market this event to reporters as a way to connect with the big news coming out of the show. So whereas in the past, if you were exhibiting at the show, you might just dump a bunch of media kits. And of course you didn't think that was going to do all the work for you, but you could expect that a number of journalists would be cruising through the media room and picking up kits and thinking about which of these stories they wanted to cover. The media day kind of combines the trends we're talking about here, because it is a for-pay opportunity, but it does have some of the elements of the old media kit structure, where you get some guaranteed time to make your pitch in front of the journalists who are attending.
And a lot of the coverage around events is covering the keynotes and less about, hey, here are all the products that were announced this day. I mean, again, we're not talking about consumer here. CES, you're going to see a ton of that, and the events before CES are huge, but we're talking about B2B. Okay, but are there still opportunities to get my product reviewed? I have a B2B, I have a database, I have an accountancy package, I have a firewall. Is anyone going to review this thing?
Well, we talked a little bit about the G2s and the Capteras. That's not necessarily a technical review, but PC Magazine still has some lab tested reviews. I don't know how much B2B they do, but Chris alluded to this earlier. There are those places where there are very specific publications, industry or trade publications, where you can still, with the right product fit for those kinds of publications, find an expert who has the understanding needed and the environment, the technical environment to test it. But yeah, way fewer than before, more influencer tech reviews. So we're seeing this more, right? Where our clients are going, hey, this popped up on YouTube. Can you find out about this? And okay, we look at it and there's sort of a not that accurate portrayal of their company's or their products features. And then, oh, look, it's sponsored by a competitor, right? So there's a new sort of, not necessarily new, but for B2B, a growing group of people who realize, hey, I can make a living reviewing these B2B products that are pretty easy to use and more consumer-like products, right? And things like collaboration platforms or design applications or things that where the user experience is driving a lot of the satisfaction.
You don't need a big set of data or a bunch of tools to test this thing. You just go on and design a tool, or it's a productivity app.
They're filling some of that gap in a way that's a little bit more tricky to navigate, right? And as they become more prominent, they seem to become more media-like, right? When I say media-like, let's just say more professional. They aren't necessarily trying to do journalism, but they are figuring out, okay, here's how much it costs for you to have me look at your product. If I don't like it, I won't say anything. And these users are, you can find them on LinkedIn. You can see that they have the bona fides necessary to be making the judgment, and buyers are paying attention to them. So we have to too.
Right. And there again, you see that the pay for play model is much more explicit or much more prominent than it has been in the past. And just like in the world of consumer tech, you will see influencers openly admitting, this is a sponsored review, but they will caveat, you know me, you know that I'm a straight shooter. My opinion can't be bought. Just time on my channel can be bought. You're seeing more and more of that in the enterprise space as well.
We talked a little bit about analysts events, but analysts, again, are another group who are obviously one up again from those influencers, but who might be more amenable to covering your product news, maybe even have the ability to sort of review this or go into it in a little bit more depth, because they're incentivized, they're being paid by your subscription and not by the advertising or the paywall from the readers that traditional media might be paid by. So they can take the time to really sort of dive into that a little bit more. So maybe there's less opportunity on the media side, but more with these influencers and analysts, quasi-analysts. Let's just talk about awards. Products can win awards. Awards get coverage. Awards reach, have influence. Still, we used to get 5 stars for the review, but you can still the products have an important role to play in awards. There are awards just for products, and product innovation is a big part of winning corporate awards. How do we feel about this?
It is one of the last remaining areas of PR that is as receptive to product as ever. And the number of awards that, especially in B2B, that charge for an application is going up. I don't know the extent to which awards drive publications' business models, but it's noticeable that so many are adopting the Fast Company model of offering 20 different categories or 30 different categories that you can win in, and recognizing multiple winners per category, and then charging anywhere from $500 to $800 for each category application. Fast Company has been doubling down on that and tripling down on that, expanding the number of award programs they have and the categories within the award programs. And smaller organizations have followed suit. It's important to evaluate the quality of these awards and consider for yourself what you're trying to get out of it. There are some awards that practically ensure that you are going to get something for your money. Even if it's a bronze tier award, you're probably not going to come away with nothing. And for a small organization that is trying to rally the team, awards can make a difference. They give the team a jolt of a satisfaction. There's a trophy you can put in the entryway to the office if you still have an office. And it's something to, brag about to potential customers. Everybody likes working with a winner. And the strange thing is, even though I think there's a general understanding that there's a certain amount of pay for play involved with a lot of these awards, psychologically, it still has an impact. Now, there is absolutely a spectrum of award quality ranging from bottom of the barrel, even we would never recommend it, to top line, the sort of thing where you buy 50 copies of Fast Company to pass out at your SKO to fire up the sales team before they start beating the streets, right? So it is very much a case by case basis, but the short version is there's a lot of opportunity in awards for product. And I would say that if anything, the number of potential awards you could apply for B2B is growing.
Yeah. What awards can do is they can provide badges for your website. And I know that sounds silly, but to Chris's point about just the psychological effect, right? I was at a previous agency, we were working on behalf of a printer company, and we were talking about awards. And we were talking about sort of the buyer journey, and they've done a lot of research as a hardware B2C company. What they said is that what would happen no matter what is that the buyer would be in the store and they would look at the side of the box and they would look down the side of the box and they would look at the competitors, and whoever had more check boxes in these specific little kind of, feature lists, right, would tend to win. And so in the packaging back then, the idea was, well, create more boxes and check them, right? And that, I think, is translatable to the website as package now. It's like, give me more things, badges that show this is good. And it won't necessarily, because they're not going to go side to side with feature comparisons anymore. It's that first scroll, that first, the first 3 or 4 tiles that you see. Look at any B2B company now, right? If you have more of those, it just psychologically is like, well, there are more. You see somebody with a bunch of medals, you're not trying to discern which one is the one that's most valiant. You're just like, look at that person with all those medals. And so that's why I think there's been a proliferation.
I think psychologically, it communicates a sort of robustness. Even if you are thinking about the individual awards, the awards en masse critically, it's sort of the way that marketers will often talk about analysts. Everyone will complain about the analyst racket and it's a shakedown and they just want you to pay to get in front of them, but they still engage and they still see the value. It's similar to the value, I think, of issuing a regular stream of news, of releases. It's less about the individual stories you get out of it, though that's important, than about communicating the sort of health and vigor of the organization. So I think that a buyer scrolling that website is going to sort of psychologically take it on board as one input among many, but it is an input. If all you saw was a bunch of awards you never heard of, and all the other evidence about the rest of the website was scanty, you couldn't find anyone else who's heard of his product. If there were red flags going up everywhere else, I don't think a bunch of awards is going to help. But alongside other signs of vigor on the product side and the marketing side, I think awards can fit in there very nicely.
Yeah, that's why you see these G2 crowd badges everywhere these days. They've really played that game. And by the way, just definitely worth entering awards, support if it's tied to a publication, because it is their revenue stream. And if you want them to be around, enter the awards. Quick shout out. Final thing here, I want to talk about data storytelling and product. We've been talking about the sort of features and benefits here, but another big opportunity to promote the capabilities and the existence of your product is the data the metadata and the data that it might sort of show on what, like the stories behind that. So Ian, talk to us a little bit about data storytelling when it comes to product PR.
I think the key here is that like your product probably and your platform probably has a bunch of interesting information in it. And if you can share that information with the media as part of your marketing around the product, it can get across the power of that product, right? So if you're a cybersecurity company that, let's say you're a very big cybersecurity company and you're used by millions of users worldwide, and every time they turn on their computer, your software powers up. Well, you'll also know what time most people turn on their computer. So thinking about what your product knows and what it's capable of delivering can provide some interesting data storytelling opportunities. Now, it's a trick to try to do it along with the launch, but once you've got your product kind of going and you've got enough data up and running, it kind of enables you to talk about the various features that you have that are available to you. So to continue with a cybersecurity company, I remember a few years back, one company was able to tell using their platform how many people checked the internet during the Super Bowl halftime. Uh-huh. Right. Yeah. And every year there's a Super Bowl halftime or Super Bowl commercial media cycle, and it talks about that. Right. And that company was able to get their name into that story and also get across the breadth that they have of data and not all the many users they have, right? I think another company that managed water did that once with toilet flushing during the Super Bowl or whatever. So, okay, that might be an even better example. There's a very niche, product. The folks who are managing water supply information, they were able to get into the mainstream using the data they had in their platform, data that completely not important to anyone outside that industry most of the time. Oh, it went down by 6 inches during, that doesn't mean anything to anyone other than somebody who works in water management. But suddenly it became the brand name that everybody would recognize most for that feature. So you have to kind of look across on what your product is capable of doing. But some of it is, it might be more directly related to your product messaging than any of the examples even I've said. It just depends on, what your tech does.
Great. So just as we wrap up here, any final thoughts when it comes to B2B product PR, Chris?
I think to recap, if you're listening to this podcast, you have seen the same things that we've seen. You're probably an experienced marketer, and you know that product PR doesn't look like it used to, earlier in your career. It certainly doesn't look the same as it did earlier in our careers, but it still has an important role to play. It is just different. It's more of an introduction. It's more about constant contact with the press. It's more about creating opportunities for yourself. And the most successful vendors in every field I work in do have a steady stream of product announcements. They do product PR. They're just very savvy about how they leverage it.
There's a shift to talking more about the problem than the product. There is a need for you to associate your brand with insight more than product features. And you got to take out your wallet if you want to do good product marketing these days. And PR still requires that.
Great points there. Really enjoyed this discussion. I totally agree. There's a huge role for product PR. It's changed, but it's absolutely vital to kind of keep that cadence going because it sparks all sorts of other opportunities that we've seen. And we've seen there's still a very lively opportunity for you to get out your product messages using the data around it, using analysts, using new types of influencers, events, etc. So absolutely different, but still a critical part of any startup's PR program. So Chris, Ian, thanks for your time. Enjoyed that. And everyone else, I hope they found that useful. And we will talk to you next week.